June the 1st marks an important day for many countries around the world in their efforts to try and ease lockdown restrictions. Let's start in Europe for you, and in the Netherlands, bars, cinemas and theatres are again open, but with only 30 people allowed inside at a time. And the country's renowned galleries and museums are opening again to visitors, but things will be very different, as our correspondent Anna Holligan explains.
Well, the first thing is the numbers. So they're allowing a fifth of the number of visitors in every day, which of course means it will be a lot quieter if you can get a space, because they aren't allowing people to just walk in off the street anymore. You have to book your 15-minute time slot in advance. The good news is there is no limit placed on the amount of time you can stand in front of the masters. So Rembrandt, Vermeer, and of course Amsterdam is home to so many cultural attractions. The Anne Frank House, the Van Gogh Museum. These masterpieces were here before the pandemic and they'll be around long after it's gone.
Anna Holligan there. Well, it's a similar story in other parts of Europe. Bars can reopen under certain restrictions in Norway, while Finland has partially reopened its libraries and restaurants. And in Greece, some hotels have reopened as the country prepares to ease travel restrictions in around 2 weeks' time. Our correspondent Gavin Lee has more.
The phase 2 of what they call the de-escalada, the de-escalation of 3 phases, starts today for 70% of the country. Basically that you can again be inside cafes, restaurants, up to 40% capacity. You can go on the beach, you can go to swimming pools, social distancing applies. You can even go to a wedding, up to 100 people outside, 50 people inside. And not for Madrid, not for Barcelona. There still seem to be areas where they've taken quite a hit. Portugal too, aside from Lisbon, again because it's had a flurry of COVID cases, you can go to cafes, bars, restaurants, and well, some pictures we've had this morning from Italy, one of the biggest attraction for Italy. In fact, 7.5 million people a year go to the Colosseum, and they've opened the doors with temperature checks. You have to have compulsory face masks as well to go in. I mean, this is part of what brings 40 billion euros to the economy in Italy. They're starting to get the lifeblood of tourism attractions reopened again this week.
Let's take you to India now, where all shops, including salons and hairdressers, are now allowed to reopen. Many train services have also resumed, but not without their issues. Our reporter Salman Ravi is in Delhi.
More than 200 trains have started running from today so that the stranded passengers, stranded people who were unable to come out and go to their places, they could actually board the trains. And you can see there is a lot of activity, while the railway station is more or less like an airport, because all the restrictions in the airport are similar to what is being practiced here. Social distancing, only those passengers who have got a confirmed ticket, they are allowed to enter only.
Well, some African nations have also eased certain restrictions. In Cameroon, schools have reopened. And in South Africa, a controversial alcohol ban has been lifted after sales were forbidden for 2 months. The measure has been credited for a big fall in domestic violence during lockdown, but responsible drinking is now allowed once more. From Monday to Thursday, alcohol can now be bought for consumption at home. And, well, take a look at this. Long queues at the liquor stores around the country, just like this one in Johannesburg. The BBC's Vumani Mkhize was there.
Now, at this Johannesburg liquor store, the doors opened at 9 a.m. sharp, and we've seen a steady stream of customers coming in. Now, the store has put in a number of safety regulations in place to ensure that customers are indeed safe, such as temperature checks, sanitization, social distancing markers, as well as ensuring that there's a limited number of people inside the store. According to the regulations, people can purchase liquor between 9 and 5 o'clock, from Mondays till Thursdays, but authorities have warned people not to rush to bottle stores, but rather to stagger their purchases throughout the week to avoid large crowds, as well as to reduce the risk of infection.
Really glad that we can trade again. We support a lot of families. It's not just about servicing our customers, it's also the families that are within our stores.
The government said the ban on alcohol sales was done to alleviate pressure on the public health system. And importantly, there has been a reduction in alcohol-related injuries in South Africa's hospitals. So the government will be monitoring the situation very carefully. But one thing is for certain though, there'll be a few sore heads tomorrow morning.
Vumani there in Joburg. Well, these restrictions are of course possible because countries have passed the peak of infections. Italy was the first country outside of China to impose a strict national lockdown. Deaths have dropped dramatically from early in the peak in April, allowing the government to start to cautiously reopen some businesses and key attractions like the Colosseum. The Spanish government's decision to ease more restrictions is based on similar results. Authorities there recorded no new corona deaths for the first time since March. That's down from 950 deaths reported at the peak of the outbreak in early April. But not all governments are waiting until cases subside before reopening. As economic and political pressures continue to build, leaders are easing lockdowns even as cases continue to rise. This is happening in Russia, for instance. Vladimir Putin, the president there, claims the pandemic has passed its peak, but cases and deaths are still rising rapidly, with authorities confirming more than 9,000 new cases on Monday alone. Cases are still rising in Moscow, which has seen one of the worst outbreaks in Russia. But on Monday, people were allowed out to exercise for the first time in 9 weeks. Sarah Rainsford went to meet them.
Families like the Nesterovs are free to wander again, as long as they're in face masks. They're still not entirely free, though. The mayor's office has assigned each block of flats in the city just 3 walk days a week to limit the crowds.
All of this opening up is happening even as Moscow is detecting more than 2,000 new coronavirus cases every single day. But President Putin has already rescheduled his Victory Day parade for later this month, and the Kremlin's keen to hold a constitutional reform vote that would allow Mr. Putin to stay on in power. The politicians here really want to move on. There's a lot of relief here at finally being released out onto the streets again, but there's also merciless mockery of the complicated new rules. So, for example, you can only go for a run until 9 a.m. And whilst you can now hire one of these city bikes as long as you wear gloves, you definitely can't sit on a bench. And all of the children's play areas are still sealed off. Moscow's mayor is calling all of this an experiment. It is the cautious reawakening of a city to see how the coronavirus responds.
So Rainsford there. Well, Latin America is now the epicenter of the global pandemic, and the situation in the region's worst hit country of Brazil is getting worse. It has confirmed more than 500,000 cases. And as you can see, the number of new deaths is rising exponentially, with almost 1,000 deaths recorded on Sunday. That brings a total to more than 29,000. Katy Watson is in Sao Paulo.
Last week, the state governor talked about Sao Paulo returning to some kind of normality, but it is very, very much the start. And how it works is this, is that the state is divided into regions, and each region is given a colour or a phase. So it goes from red, which is the strictest phase where the toughest problems are. So there's much more strict regulations on what people can do. Going up to blue, where there's much more flexibility. But the idea being is that the severe states, the severe regions can go through those phases eventually and come out the other end. Now here in Sao Paulo, we're in orange. That means that places like shopping malls, car dealerships, they can start to look at reopening.